So first of all, pozdrav. So I hope I said this a little bit correctly. So welcome to my talk, Testing in 2024. I had already an introduction. So I'm Rainer, I come from Austria. I'm part of Angular Architects. I also have two YouTube channels. One is NG News, an Angular newsletter in the video form. Another one is just normal YouTube channel as you usually also find it. So testing in 2024, testing is usually also a little bit of a subjective, opinionated topic, so I have to be a little bit here, also provide my own opinion. But the way how we do it is that I will first of all give you a definition, an overview of the testing types, of the terms that I'm going to use. Then a little bit about testing strategies, so if there is actually something like an optimal testing strategy. And then at the end, also about the available testing tools, which we have right now, and also those that we can await for the future. Testing types. Why do I actually have to do this? Because there is no universal definitions of testing types. So it could be the case that I use the term unit test and that you have a completely different interpretation of what a unit test means. And that's why, well, I have to give you my definition so that you understand what I mean when I use this or the other term. I will not reintroduce new terms. I will use those which I think are most commonly used, also here coming from the testing pyramid. So I will use unit, component, integration, and end-to-end tests. And so as I said, what is a unit test? So when I speak of a unit test, then this means that my test focuses on a TypeScript class, even if it's a service or a component, I don't care, it's just a TypeScript class that I'm working with. And I also don't call the methods of that class, I also assert against the properties. And I don't really care about the dependencies that this class has. I will always mock them or just spy them, however you want to call them. In the end, the original dependency is not part of the test. When I say I have a component test, then it's a little bit similar than a unit test, but with a component test, I communicate with my component in this case via the DOM. So I am not calling methods, I am triggering, I'm clicking on a button or I'm typing something into an input field. I do this via the DOM. And when I want to assert something, I'm not asserting against the property of the class, but I'm asserting against something which shows up in the DOM. So some text or something else needs to be there. In terms of dependencies, I still try to mock as much as possible, at least in my variation. When I now say I'm writing an integration test, again, my communication layer is the DOM, but I try not to mock as much. Actually, I try to mock as few dependencies as possible, maybe just the HTTP client, and I include them the rest. But this is always a little bit tricky. This is very tricky. The boundary between component integration tests are always a little bit blurry. So it's not so easy to tell which one is now what. And of course, if I say I'm writing an end-to-end test, then I don't really care if there is a component, if there is a concept of a component. I don't care at all if I'm using Angular. I'm just using, in my case, the browser, remotely control the browser, and that's it. So these are the terms: unit, integration, component, and end-to-end test. The question now is, can we come up with something like a recommended testing approach, testing strategy? Now the point is, so the way how I was raised up, so the way how I learned testing, we're a little bit older, so in my case it was only unit tests. So only test the TypeScript class, mock everything else, don't go and even try to add some of the dependencies in your tests. I would be careful about this. The problem is, especially in Angular, where we have a front-end application that we want to test, you always have the main logic, the business logic is part of the backend. So what many Angular applications are doing, not all of them, but quite a lot, that they are maybe just fetching some data, showing it in the component. We as a user, we do something with it, and then we just send it back to the backend where the real logic happens. So our components, our services tends to be a little bit thin, let's put it like this. And you can, of course, write a unit test of a service where you say, well, the service is just calling an HTTP client, So you mock the HTTP client and verify that, well, the get method of the HTTP client is executed. You can do that, but the question is this really an efficient usage of your time? And there, over the years, we have now seen alternative models to the testing pyramid, which actually says write as many unit tests as you can because they are the fastest. And there I have here two examples. So we have the so-called testing trophy from Kent Dodds, and we also have from Spotify the testing Hahnekamp. And they say, well, why maybe, let's just maybe focus on the middle part. So unit tests really where we have a lot of logic, but maybe if we have this kind of use case where we have a component which uses some services for backend communication, some subcomponents, and they don't have so much code in them, why not let's just write a test that contains all that stuff together and not write a separate test for every file. So this is this kind of understanding here, and this is this kind of approach where we say, well, it should be, the focus should be more in the middle. End-to-end testing, we see here also, it doesn't really have a huge part. The reason for that is that with end-to-end testing, you have other challenges. So end-to-end testing in terms of coverage, they are quite efficient. But in end-to-end testing, we very soon hit a boundary, a limit. They are very slow. It's always a challenge how we can deal with the infrastructure, how we want to set up it. Do we include the backend as well, also the database? So that's always a little bit of a struggle. And that's maybe in the middle, that's the sweet spot, so to say. Yeah, so in the end, right balance, if you're going more towards unit component or integration tests, what I always say is, yeah, you can have an integration test where you say you only want to mock the HTTP client, but then you have to be careful that not everything ends up in the test. So sometimes you will have some kind of central services that you still want to mock. But again, the goal is maybe not mock everything. That's something where I would say most of us can hopefully agree on. Good, so if we now say we are finding ourselves mainly in the middle, then the question, of course, also comes up, which tools are there available? And this will now lead us to the main part. So you see here now, I've switched again. The testing pyramid is not there anymore. It's now this kind of trophy style more. And, well, in Angular, we have Jasmine, and here I also have to say Karma, and soon the web test runner. So Jasmine, just to give an explanation, because this is something, sometimes this is a little bit misunderstood, what these things are doing. So Jasmine is the testing framework. So all the commands that we use, the it, the expect, the matches, these are the commands that come from Jasmine. And the problem of Jasmine is we are using a front-end framework. So if somebody says document create element, then Jasmine doesn't provide this command. So Jasmine needs, so there needs to be something where these kind of web APIs are coming from, and that's the task of Karma, to put it short. So Karma takes our Jasmine test and puts them into the browser, and there the complete web API is available. Now at the moment, Karma is deprecated, not Jasmine. We very often hear that Jasmine is deprecated, so we need to find a new testing solution. No. It's about Karma. So only the thing that takes our tests and puts them into a browser, that one's deprecated. And Angular is working on a successor, and that's the web test runner. It's a modern version, but it will do the same thing as Karma. It will put your Jasmine tests into the browser. That's it. It's also then the reason why you will not have to change your tests. It will just work out of the box. We don't have it in Angular 18, maybe in 19, or maybe in one of the minor releases of Angular 18. We will see. But the thing is, if you're using Jasmine at the moment, you don't have to be afraid that you have to rewrite your code anymore. That's not going to happen. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of Jasmine? First of all, it's the official testing solution. So this is key. This is very important. This is the one that the Angular team has kind of prepared for you. It's supported by Angular, which means we don't have certain issues which we have with other testing frameworks which are more community driven, because as soon as there is an issue, the Angular team has already seen that problem and has fixed it already. So for us, we don't really have to care. Tests are just working. And it's also used, of course, inside of Google. So a lot of code base is already running with Jasmine. There is a full browser support. You can see this as a disadvantage or as an advantage. That really depends how much you need the web API. And it's not supported by Nix officially. That's a problem, I would say. You can, if you use NX, you can set it up manually. But if you are like me, if I use a tool, I don't want to care too much. I just want to write application code, and I want that my tool is providing everything that I need. So for me, if somebody says it's not supported by NX and I need to use NX, that would be an issue. And it's not so fast as others. That's also true. But in general, what I have to say is I think that the value of Jasmine in general is a little bit underrated. So it doesn't get the reputation it should have. Because most of us tend to use or want to use Jest. And here I would say it's the opposite. Again, I said it's a little bit opinionated. I think Jest has a little bit of a too high reputation. But nevertheless, it's the major testing framework in JavaScript. That's also important. So if you look at the download statistics, it has support for parallelization. So your tests will be executed also in parallel. And you also have something which I would call affected mode. That means that Jest is able to identify those tests which are affected by your changes and then only runs those tests. So those of you who are using NX, you might have heard of a similar feature. Jest has this built-in. Upcoming official support. So if you're currently using Jest, we will get an official support for Jest from Angular, but after they have replaced Karma with the web test runner. The Karma replacement has top priority at the moment. And again, advantage, disadvantage, it depends on community contributions. So if something fails, if something does not work, the Angular team is not really responsible for it. You need to find help somewhere else, or you have to fix it on your own. And in the past, we have seen that these things happen, especially when Angular modules have been compiled to ECMAScript modules. Jest had huge problems, especially in terms of the build time. And this was something which was not fixed within a week. I would say it lasted more than a year even, and it's still not fixed completely at the moment. I mean, Jest has support for ESM, but if you look it up in the documentation, it says it's experimental at the moment. And these are all things you don't have with Jasmine. You don't even have to care about that. Asynchronous tasks are also a little bit harder to test, or asynchrony in general, but here with zoneless and the way how we will test Angular in the future, I think this is going to change, and of course also with the official support. So this is about Jest. So Jasmine and Jest, those two are quite common. We have a third one, and this has already been introduced by Robin in the morning, and that's Vitest. So when it comes to Vitest, I would say that's the modern testing framework at the moment, seeing from JavaScript. It is from the ground built up upon TypeScript, also with ESM support, because it's quite young. It's based on Vite, it's also something very good, and it tends to be faster than Jest. There we have to be a little bit careful. I can only refer here to some benchmarks made by Eunice Chady, who said, yeah, if he compares Jest natively together with Vitest, Vitest is faster, but if he combines Jest with SWC, it's more or less on the same level. But nevertheless, the native version is faster, and we have full Jest compatibility, which means if you have already written tests in Jest, then it's very easy to switch because the API and the code is more or less the same. Good. And the problem with Vitest is that it's supported by analog, not maybe only, but again, you have this kind of community thing. It's not officially supported by Angular, so you're depending on the community, and we don't have so much experience at the moment with it. That's just logical. Vitest is new, doesn't have this kind of matureness as Jest does. Something you also have to be aware of. Yeah, so these are the kind of testing frameworks in that sense, and of course we also know that we also need something for end-to-end testing. So Jasmine, Jest, and Vitest can be used for unit component integration tests, and when it comes to end-to-end testing, we have first of all Cypress. So I think Cypress is well known. The way, or what we can say about Cypress, is that it's the most used end-to-end framework at the moment, and it shines with a great developer experience. So in Cypress, you see your application, you see what kind of impact your test commands had in the past. You can travel through your test. So it's really great. You're very productive if you're using Cypress compared with other end-to-end testing frameworks, not even talking about Jasmine or that stuff. That's way beyond. The tests are also stable. So this is also something that I hear quite often, that with Cypress we might have flaky test, where I would say, Cypress is extremely easy to use. You might not even need to read the documentation, but still you need to understand the basics in order to come up with stable tests. It could happen that you have flaky tests, but I would say in most cases you can't blame Cypress for it, politely put. And it's an official partner of Angular. That's also important. So when Angular kind of deprecated Protractor, which was the official end-to-end framework of the Angular CLI, they said that we are going to do now partnerships with other end-to-end frameworks, and one of them is Cypress. Also good. So they provide schematics and all that stuff. Good. What else is there to say? Tests in Cypress tend to be executed slowly because we don't have parallelization support out of the box. You can buy it, but there you have to use Cypress Cloud. That's a commercial product. And the same is also true for test replay. This is something you will definitely require when your tests are failing in the CI, because you don't see why they have failed, and therefore you need to get some better reporting, and that's exactly what test replay is doing it, but you have to run it then in the Cypress Cloud. Now for the European Union it might be an issue because the Cypress Cloud, as far as I know, doesn't run on-premise and not on promise, and it's not running in the European Union. So this might be a little bit of a problem. And there are some minor constraints when it comes to end testing, because what Cypress is doing, that our testing code, the code of the test itself, runs as JavaScript inside of the browser. So there are certain things we cannot do because of limitations that we have when JavaScript runs inside of the browser. Typical example, you can't control multiple tabs at once. That's not going to work, and some other tiny things. But in general, it's quite good. And we see here the download statistic. So I mentioned before there are official partnerships with end-to-end vendors. Here we have all of them. So if you type in ng end-to-end, you will see a list of them. You have Cypress, Nightwatch, Puppeteer, and WebDriver.io. And here you see that clearly Cypress in the blue color is currently the number one. Next to Cypress, the second one is Playwright. To make it short, what is Playwright all about? Playwright comes from Microsoft. They have hired people from Google who worked on DevTools at Chromium, so they know quite a lot about browser engineering. And what they did is they said, okay, Microsoft, we want to bring out an end-to-end testing framework. They took the best parts of Cypress, copied them, tried to make them better. And those things where they already knew it's not going to work so good, that they try to avoid them and maybe come up with an alternative. So this is what Playwright, in short, is all about. It's safe to say, it's a safe bet to say Playwright is the future number one if you're looking at the download statistics. We have parallelization, trace viewing out of the box, so features that you would get in Cypress only with Cypress Cloud. And we don't have any constraints because Playwright tests, they run outside of the browser. They have full control over the browser, so you don't have any limitations at all. So this is what Playwright really is good in. It's not an official partner of Angular. Don't know why. I think schematics are missing. And here we have the download statistics again. And this time I have included Playwright. And you see now Playwright is in blue color, Cypress is in orange color. And you see here what I meant, it's the future number one. So it's just a question of time. If you look at the rise since 2022 of Playwright, also where they started at the beginning of this year and where they are now, yeah, so that's the way it is. Good. So these are the four, I would say, the major frameworks which are important when it comes to Angular testing. The question now, as I said in the beginning, testing, or more or less in the middle, is the sweet spot. And now the question is, okay, what kind of framework should we now use for this middle testing? Now the point is, Jasmine, Jest, and Vitest, of course, they are there, but both end-to-end frameworks also provide in the meantime component testings. So there are packages available where you can also do component testing with an end-to-end framework. What that means, or what they are doing internally, is that they are able to kind of compile Angular components individually, and they will then boot up, we can say, a dev server, where those components are running. And this allows us to use the normal end-to-end testing tools to test this simple component setup or integration setup, however you want to call it, with the tools that you have available from an end-to-end testing perspective. So this is much, much better. You see more, it's easier, because with Jasmine, Jest, and Vitest, when you write a component test, you have to deal with asynchronous tasks. That's not easy. You also have to deal with DOM events. So sometimes you need to kind of dispatch certain DOM events on your own. End-to-end tests do this for you automatically. Change detection, triggering change detection is also something that you have to take care of. Maybe not in the future, but at the moment, this is what it is. So testing with Vitest, Jest, and Jasmine is really hard. So we could use Playwright Cypress, but if you say, no, you still want to use the other tools, the existing tools, then I would highly recommend you that you consider using an additional library on top of them, which will make it a little bit more livable or easier, let's put it like this. And I would recommend the testing library. There are also other libraries available like Spectator, but they are running on top of the native test bed, and you can use Jasmine, Jest, and also Vitest together with them. And this is definitely what I would recommend. So the question that you have to ask yourself at the end when it comes to the tooling is testing library, and again, Jest, Jasmine depends on you, or Vitest, and Cypress and Playwright. When it comes to the testing library, first of all, it makes it really much, much better to work with I just now say Jasmine. And it is also so that with the testing library, you have a certain testing style, which it enforces. So there are some certain commands where it really forces you to communicate with the DOM. And only then you get the benefits of the testing library. It also takes care of the change detection as much as possible, and also about the asynchronous stuff. So very good in that sense. It's a huge ecosystem, so you also have plugins available for the testing library. Testing library was not made for Angular in the first place. It was more made for React, and we have different bindings also for Angular. So there is quite a lot about it. And yeah, as I said, you can use your existing Jasmine, Jest, whatever you have, just add this library, and then you can write your integration component tests. The downside is, of course, you don't have this developer experience that you only can get from a real end-to-end testing framework. And this then speaks for Cypress component testing. So with Cypress component testing, we get this end-to-end testing developer experience. We are really productive. It's integrated directly into Angular, so Cypress understands Angular, knows how to compile Angular code, and also how to set it up in their dev server. And of course, you also have lower maintenance costs, because the testing code with Cypress is much, much easier to maintain than anything else. There are some downsides. The technical constraints, something I have already mentioned. Build issues. So we getting reports from larger code bases that the build time takes quite a very long time, more than a minute, before you see something in Cypress. And the next one is tricky, and I was thinking if I actually should put this on a slide or if I would just say it and not have a written form of it, but yeah, nevertheless. Yeah, I have 2.5 minutes time, so I can explain a little bit the background story. When Cypress component testing was released, of course, it took some while until developers started to try it out. We get the first experiences and so on and so forth. And then from Cypress came an official GitHub issue where they said, we see that a lot of requirements are coming in from the Angular developers. Now, we don't want to deal with them separately, but we want to collect now some kind of a requirements list. What is needed by Angular developers from Cypress to come up with a good component testing solution? And only 2 people answered. The first one was Jordan Powell, which actually works for Cypress, and the other one was me. And then nobody else, so the GitHub issue was closed after some period of time. And we haven't seen any new release of Angular component testing in Cypress since March 2023. So that is something you also have to keep in mind. And then we have the Playwright component testing. That's not actually even available. It has the same advantages than Cypress, but with Playwright, we find ourselves in a community-driven way, where Cypress says we are providing support for Angular component testing as a company. Playwright said the community should do it. So we have seen now for more than half a year work going on providing Playwright component testing, especially from Younes Chahidi and Sander from the Netherlands. And that is now complete. We are currently in the merging phase, so the PR is completed. It's now about code review. And it's the same thing that Cypress component testing is doing. And it's experimental. That is also something which is very important. Playwright sees component testing at the moment as experimental, and we will just see how in the future it will turn out. But yeah, looking at the current situation now, if we say Playwright component testing is almost there, Cypress component testing didn't get so much active maintenance. The last slide is, if you want to play it safe, then I would stick to testing library and not use maybe a component testing from end-to-end testing. If you say you want to have the best solution available at the moment, again, Playwright is not out there, has not been released, then it's Cypress. And if you say you're an early adopter or you want to be a little bit brave, then just go with component testing of Playwright. My personal preference would be to use Jasmine at the moment, together with the testing library, that I'm prepared, and once Playwright component testing will be released, I would migrate my component integration testing to Playwright. And for end-to-end testing, I would also use Playwright if I start a new project right now. If you have an existing one, that's always a different discussion. Right, here are some further links. We will then also have a Q&A, and I'd like to say, Hvala vam, hope that's correct, and thank you very much.